He's John Timpane.
And he's Don Rooney.
And this is
the Musical Innertube.
Now, you may ask, why is this podcast called the Musical Innertube?
And we may reply, because that's its name, of course.
Now, how did this podcast get that name?
Back in college, we hosted a radio show. Once, we tried to introduce a soothing musical interlude.
Instead, we messed up and wound up introducing a soothing musical innertube, and the name stuck.
So here we are, hundreds of years later, still talking
to interesting people about their interesting lives.
Difference makers who really make a difference. On today's Musical Innertube, we welcome back political commentator Dick Polman. Welcome back, Richard.
Thank you, John. And Don, too.
Well, thank you for including me in this fest.
Dick is Maury Povich Writer-in-Residence and Professor of Journalism at the University of Pennsylvania, where he's been since 2006. He's also been the national political writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer, covering presidential elections from 1992 to 2008. I have to say, Dick, everybody's thinking about Donald Trump, convicted sex offender. The E. Jean Carroll civil decision came down against Trump. Trump is not a rapist because that's not mentioned in the final charges, but he has been found guilty of sexual assault. He's not a felon because, it's a civil trial. And yet we're in, yet again, with Donald Trump, a world we don't understand. Can you make sense of it for us?
You're right. We'll start with the top line news, which is that if the Republican polls are any indication, it sounds to me like Republican voters are prepared not only to nominate once again a twice impeached insurrection-stoking criminal defendant, but in fact a twice impeached insurrection-stoking criminal defendant and convicted sexual assaulter. This is a party at about a quarter century ago, when Bill Clinton was having his Monica Lewinsky woes. The Republican Party was all about making the character issue, as they called it, predominant in American politics. And so this is how far they've traveled. And obviously there's many, many reasons that we don't have time to delve into about why this is so. But to cut to the chase of your question, they're prepared to nominate him again because our information structure, if you want to call it that, is so siloed now and so polarized that the reports of what happened with this jury finding him liable, will just fall on deaf ears within the Republican base. It'll just be considered, I think, well, they're after him again. They've been after him, since the beginning. And this is just one more example of how they're out to persecute him. And he was smart enough, if that's the right word, to basically, continuously pre-spin essentially, what's happened today, by basically saying, yeah, this is part of just the persecution of himself. And how everybody should just, in the fan base, should just double down and let's hate the people who are doing this. And we can delve into a lot more about why that's happening, of course. But I think there's one other thing I think we can be clear about. His lawyer in this case, there isn't much chance that this guy's going to get paid. Trump was going to probably stiff this guy anyway, like he stiffed all his Atlantic City contractors back in the day. But now this guy will definitely not see a penny of it.
Well, he worked so hard, he called no witnesses. Yeah, he didn't do very much.
Look how fast the verdict came down. It was really within an hour or two at the most after they got the instructions from the judge. And I think what John just said, the fact that they didn't present a defense and he was over in Ireland talking big about how he was going to come and he was going to confront E. Jean Carroll. And then, of course, big surprise, he never showed up. let's just say the optics look pretty bad when you don't show up at your own trial to defend yourself. Although I think by the end, I think his attorney was probably relieved that he didn't show up, because who knows what he could have said.
Well, I saw some of the videotaped testimony that he did submit, and they showed him a picture of him at a function, and he said, "That's me and my wife." And it wasn't Melania; it was the woman he was married to before, Martha.
Marla Maples?
Marla Maples,
Marla
yes.
Maples.
He says, "That's my wife." And they said, "No, that's E. Jean Carroll." And he was pointing to her and saying, "That's my wife. That's Marla Maples." So even in his videotape testimony, he was stepping all over himself. But that doesn't seem to matter one way or the other. Also, Trump's, you were talking about him stiffing Atlantic City and other vendors by simply saying he wasn't happy with whatever they gave him and he wasn't going to pay them. His other big legal tactic is to appeal. So I'm assuming this is going to go through the appeals courts for months and months and months, right?
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't, there's a judgment right of up to $5 million, but, that's, who knows if E. Jean Carroll will ever see a cent of that. I'm not necessarily convinced that she particularly cares about how much she was going to get. I don't think that was the point. But the fact that he's got this attached to his name now, really, I think prompts us to wonder, indeed, how this will play out, with the electorate generally. I mean, certainly, like we were just saying a minute ago, with his fan base or the MAGA base, the Republican base, it won't matter. They'll probably love him even more. But what about the general public? And I mean, I don't know whether you guys were going to get into this, but there was a poll earlier this week for ABC News Washington Post poll, which said that within a general election format, that Trump was drawing a higher percentage of potential voters than Joe Biden. And it's like, that is like set off a panic in a number of non-Trump circles. I don't know. I mean, I think some people are considering it an outlier poll. I'm a little skeptical only because, we're 18 months out from the election. A million things can happen. And polls 1 year to 18 months out from an election are notoriously odd and weird. It's, it's a free sentiment that people can, they can just talk about their frustration with whoever's in power. And I'll just say about one thing about it. I have a long memory, and even though I wasn't covering politics in 1983, even though I was an adult then, I distinctly remember that in 1983, the Democratic candidate who was just kicking it in the polls was John Glenn, the former astronaut and senator from Ohio, who in matchups with Ronald Reagan was beating Ronald Reagan, who was going to be up for re-election. A year later, Glenn was, fizzled out and Reagan won 49 states. Now, nobody today wins 49 states, but, cause we're too closely polarized, but I'm skeptical. Other polls don't show anything nearly this drastic. But it does. Democrats, of course, being Democrats, a lot of them are really freaked out about it. And the ones who were worried about, Joe Biden's age, are certainly, fretting as they're wont to do.
Now that we've trashed polls, there was one this morning of likely Republican voters, which gave and a pretty strong poll of its kind, of course, very early and sort of shooting at the breeze, but still Trump was leading, the governor of, Florida, DeSantis by 60 to 19%.
Is this a national poll or was it a state?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought it was a national poll, but I might not have it all up there in the right way. Let's say that that's true. That was before everything that happened today with the verdict.
Yeah,
maybe it'll go to 80 nothing.
I mean, I have to say that one of the things that I think has hurt DeSantis, Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, is, and I know this is going to sound superficial, but he's not nearly, at least for within the Republican base, he's not as entertaining as Trump. I mean, you could look at, yes, he's doing all the right things in terms of being against the so-called woke movement and all that, but he's not entertaining the way Trump is. He's got a kind of humorless. He's kind of flat in delivery. And this stuff kind of matters. The Republican base, the fan base has, forget 2015 when Trump first came on the scene as a candidate. Pre-2015, they knew him as a TV character. They knew him from, The Apprentice and all that. He's a TV personality, and they know his moves. They're comfortable with his hyperbole. They're, so DeSantis doesn't strike them as nearly as, as charismatic, I guess is the term that one would use loosely. Personality does matter, in politics. And I can't necessarily discount that as being a one explanation for what the stats that you just cited, John.
The other thing that comes to mind, though, is this nebulous, nefarious, undecided voter, which I think is what everybody's going after, because Trump has his MAGA base, which is maybe 30 to 40%. And there are Democrats that are going to vote for Joe Biden, and that maybe is another 30 to 40%. His approval ratings are right around there anyway. So what about the middle part? The middle part's usually the ones that pollsters are worried about going one way or the other. And right now, it doesn't seem like they don't seem to have a track right now as to who they would support.
Well, I think people who really specialize in this have said this, so it's not like I'm trying to pass judgment on undecided voters. But there is a correlation between voters who consider themselves undecided and voters who are basically low information citizens who do not pay that close attention to what's going on. And I think what's potentially, but I say this potentially, I don't necessarily say this as a decisive thing, but potentially risky for President Biden right now is, for example, if, without getting into all the details about the debt ceiling fight and the fact that if we get to the point where Uncle Sam can't pay its bills next month and the economy starts to get shaky because of it, or worse, low information voters may just look up and say, well, I don't know who's really to blame here, but this sounds bad. And he's the president, isn't he? And frankly, I think Republicans know that. The Republicans on the Hill know that. I mean, and there have been polls that have been showing that if something terrible like that happens, some kind of serious economic consequences, people who don't really pay the close attention to what's going on and the fact that Republicans voted 3 times to raise the debt ceiling during the Trump presidency, for example, they might just say, well, a pox on both houses, but he's the president. Why isn't he, quote unquote, doing something? So, I mean, that's just one example, but I think that's, the whole low information voter, thing is very, very, it's very problematic for an incumbent, or it can be, if they don't get ahead of things, and communicate, potentially better than they are right now.
We'll be right back to our podcast in just a moment. But first, here's a soothing musical interlude.
Dick Polman is Maury Povich Writer-in-Residence and Professor of Journalism at the University of Pennsylvania, where he's been since 2006.
From 1992 to 2006, he was national political writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer, covering presidential elections from 1992 to 2008.
He was also a political columnist at the Inquirer, and from 2012 to 2019, he was a columnist on WHYY-FM.
Follow his work at dickpolman.net and check out his UPenn webpage at www.english.upenn.edu/people/Dick-Polman.
And now we return you to the Musical Innertube, already in progress.
In the in the last 45 years, starting in the 1980s, there has been a movement to establish the Republican Party in a way that they've never been established before. That is to say, to take over state legislatures, and once there to gerrymander election districts, and if there is a Democratic governor, to curtail the governor's powers, and to pass laws which will make it harder for anyone else to be elected. And I think we are beginning to see in anywhere from 19 to 26 states, depending on how you count things, that they're having amazing success. I mean, we are in a country where most people want gun laws, and no place is doing them. We are in a country where a woman's privacy as regards to her reproductive choices are favored by wide margins in most polls, especially so in recent polls. And yet we are getting more and more restrictive anti-abortion and anti-contraceptive laws. We got a lot of book burning going on in the United States, and it's happened suddenly, or so it seems. But it's part of it has to be that there is a large, very firmly set number of voters, especially locally, who will always vote for Republican candidates, no matter what. And it doesn't look like they are very easily shaken. And I'm wondering, Dick, when you look at this strange sort of truth about our system, is there anything that anybody can do about that? It looks like it's pretty nicely set up now.
Well, I'll get to the looking ahead part in a second, but just to sort of trace back to the roots of how all this has happened, you guys, and I've written about this before, is that Democrats have made a very, very big mistake over like a 20-year period, at least 20-year period, where they did not pay sufficient attention to the grassroots, to grassroots races for state legislatures around the country. They were focused, they were top down. They were focused from the, hey, if we elect a president and if we get the Senate or whatever, we're okay. But they left they left a vacuum at the local level. And I forget what the statistics are here, although I've written about them. It was that the amount of money that Republicans spent on state legislative races, really starting in the early 90s, I think it was. They had committees. They were like really meticulous about it. The Democrats were always playing catch up or not bothering about it to the same extent. And it was particularly evident during the Obama years when, all right, so they elected Obama. It was this great, sort of revolution from the top. And they said, okay, well, we've done our job. We're okay now. Meanwhile, while Obama was president, Democrats lost between, I think it was something like 900 to 1,000 state legislative seats nationwide. And that's when these local chambers just started to flip. And it came, I guess, whether it's messaging or money, they did not spend the same amount of attention on it. And we're seeing a lot of ways now, we're seeing the results of it. I mean, what's happening now, to just put my own description on top of John's, is that, Trump lost the White House, but the MAGA movement, is now bottom up, grassroots up. And, so we're getting kind of like a sort of, I don't want to say it's a quiet revolution, but it's it's a counter revolution, at the grassroots level. And what's disturbing about it, I suppose, is that Republicans used to campaign on how they were against government overreach and how they were against telling people what to do. And now, through a lot of these laws and a lot of what you just cited before, John, they're affecting what, women's personal choices, what kids can read in schools, They're going after, well, it's like DeSantis going after with the legislative help, private companies like, that anger them, like Disney, and it used to be, my God, government going after private companies, whatever happened to the sanctity of the private sector. So, we're in a whole new world now here. And, the only answer I can think of to this is that, Democrats they've got to start. Well, I know they know this, but they need to really step up their game, state by state at the local level. Now, obviously, in some places it's working. They did get back, I think, in the midterms. They started to get back some state legislative chambers for the first time. They started to reverse all their losses. Yeah, and they won one of the chambers in Pennsylvania, which was like, whoa, and kept the governorship. But
by one vote.
By one vote.
They won the House by one seat, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. By one seat, right. So they still have a long way to go. And it's the only, the only way they're going to claw this back is if they're going to start talking to voters at the local level. But I think what the Republicans have built up, just to answer with my last part of my very long answer here, is it's not just politics and political identification on the Republican side. It's like your total identity. It's your social identity. It's your religious identity. It's looking at the other side as an enemy that the word liberal is like, an enemy to America. And, that is, I think that's actually in some ways the most disturbing aspect of what's happened.
Liberal equals satanic in a lot of places, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, Trump didn't invent this, but he stepped in and marketed it better than anybody.
Yeah. Let me ask you if there's another grassroots movement that's in response to this. And what I'm thinking of is John brought up the abortion topic. In, I think, every state where they have put abortion to a general vote, including states like Kansas and North Carolina, abortion availability has won.
Yeah, that's
people
true.
have voted to keep abortion available. This is I'm looking right now at a Fox News poll that was released at the end of April, where 77%, this is a Fox News poll, 77% of the people responding wanted a 30-day waiting period for all gun purchases. 87% said they support requiring criminal background checks for all gun buyers. 81% want to raise the legal age to 21. So obviously, people are very, very active in trying to make sure that gun control becomes a topic, because we're having shootings every day now, sometimes twice or three times a day. So do you see that maybe there is another grassroots movement underfoot now that might eat away at some of the grassroots building that the Republicans have done?
Yeah, I mean, you look at these polls, it's the majority. So then you have to say, where is this majority? Why aren't they, countering? I mean, the potential is definitely there. The one caveat I would say about abortion is, there was that amazing referendum in Kansas where it passed by like a landslide to protect it. And other states have done it as well, like you've said. When abortion is on the ballot by itself, like in a referendum, it's a very, very clean verdict, just like Don just described. What we don't know, I guess, until next year is that when abortion is just, one of a mix of issues on the ballot, whether it's going to have the same mobilizing power for people who want to protect the right to choose. One would like to think it could be. The one glimmer of hope, I'd say, you mentioned guns, Don. I mean, one glimmer of hope I can look at, I mean, it's a long way from total passage, but in Texas, one of the chambers just passed, they just passed a bill to raise the raise the age when you can go out and buy an assault rifle. So I guess now, the mass shooters have to be 21 instead of 18. So I guess that's considered progress. But, there's still a lot of fear of despite everything that's happened with the NRA, and I think they even filed for bankruptcy at one point, there's still a lot of fear, of what the NRA can do to candidates who really try to push back against open carry and no gun training and assault weapons and everything else. But, one would think it's, we all wonder, and we ask rhetorically, what is it going to take? Right? What's it going to take? And it's a terrible thing. I hate the fact that I think this way. But I kind of thought that, there was going to be a gigantic sea change in favor of gun reform after the Sandy Hook Elementary School shootings of all those children. That's 10 years ago. Yep. And I'm thinking, well, if it's not going to happen, then how is it going to happen?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because in some ways we're more aware of the Constitution now because so many people think of it as being under siege. And, but it's also sort of under the rug. It's, a lot of people are, in the name of the Constitution, sort of doing things that are right on the margins of what's okay. Many of the things that they often stand up in the courts, not always. You'll see some gerrymandering, struck down in the courts, although for the most part they seem to be supported. In other words, it's legal. So elections do have consequences. It just seems as though the whole idea is to win and then stay on top.
Yeah. Well, it's all about power. And anything that can help, anything that can help in the seizure of power is fair game. And so, the old party principles, Republican Party principles go out the window. I was going to add something else that I've been thinking about, but haven't written about yet. Although others have, is how Republicans are, I mentioned earlier about Biden's age. I think Republicans are very much gearing up to run for what is now glibly known as they're going to run against dead Biden and live Kamala. In other words, that she is the Achilles heel on this ticket because she is, at least in terms of the polls, broadly unpopular for reasons which may or may not be valid, but even kick that around if you want. And they think they see her as a weak. So the idea that if Joe's not going to live through his campaign, as candidate Nikki Haley has already said out loud, are people going to want to essentially be voting for Kamala Harris? It's like, all right, if they can't get anything on Biden, they're going to focus on her. It's like, do we want her to be president in the next 4 years? And I think that's going to be, already is starting to emerge as a lot of their strategy. I mean, I see all the time when I go on Twitter and I see, conservatives every time Biden skips a syllable in some kind of public remark, they're shoveling the dirt on him already. And it's all about, it's really aimed at her. And I'm not, like I said before, I'm not exactly sure why she's so broadly unpopular. It may be because, she's flubbed a few interviews, or they've given her the White House has given her some bad no-win tasks to, like the border, to go after. I have some colleagues in the press who covered her, very brief presidential campaign who said that, she had no message and she was highly disorganized. And so, I guess it's a combination of those things, but you can see how the Biden people are they're trying to build her up now. She's appearing with him a lot more, and, they know that they got to do that. I mean, it's clear that they realize that is some kind of vulnerability, fairly or not.
What about something that I've heard a lot about? It's kind of faded in the last couple of months, but I heard about it especially right after the midterms, and that is Republicans fighting amongst themselves. You had the MAGA people who are younger and distrustful of government and so forth, and then you seem to have the old what's the word? Brahmins? The Republicans who were for business and for financial stability and blah, blah, blah. And they seem to be fading now, or the whole idea is that they're being overtaken by the MAGA people and Donald Trump. So is that still a problem? Or is, like I said, you heard about that right after the Republicans did badly in the midterms, but it's sort of, as we get closer to the general election, it's sort of fading away. And now the Republicans seem to be more focused, or at least that's the reports seem to have them more focused.
Well, I'll when you mention Brahmins, I'll use a synonym for that. Kind of like there used to be, let's just say, so-called wise men in the party. I mean, we're going back a generation or two now, but there were people who could realize, when there was a real problem, they could step in and cut the party's losses. I mean, certainly the most famous example is when Nixon was on the verge of being impeached, and they went to bunch of them went to the White House and said, "Time's up, Dick," and it got to go. Those days are long over now. And what's the best example of that? All right, never mind the fact that Trump is, as I was saying earlier, twice impeached. He's a criminal defendant in one case. Now he's a convicted sexual abuser. Aside from that, if you just look at the win-loss record, all right, they lost because of him and the drag on the ticket. They lost the midterms in 2018. They lost the presidential race in 2020. They lost the Senate again in 2022 and barely won the House, by a fragile single digits. So you would think, just if it's a question of pragmatics, if nothing else, that they would say, we got to find a winner. And yes, there are some people in the Republican Party who are saying that. Believe it or not, there's a presidential candidate in former governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson. He's been on a couple Sunday shows, but who knows who he is in terms of the general public. And he's very, very, very overtly saying we've got to move on from Trump. But he doesn't get much of an audience with the Republicans anymore, with the Republican base. Then you have Liz Cheney. Remember her? I mean, she's got,
sure.
She got bounced from her seat pretty unceremoniously. She has a political action committee where they just put out a video in the last couple days how we can't afford to nominate Trump anymore. But the party's just kind of dismissed her. So, so when I was saying that the party is bottom up, it really is. If you've got a guy who basically, has who worships him on some level in a semi-religious fashion and thinks that, that they hate the same enemies. He hates the people that they hate.
Yes.
And the people they hate are after him, quote unquote. There's not much talking to him. I mean, I can't remember who did this. It might have been Jordan Klepper from The Daily Show or somebody. I think it's Jordan Klepper. He goes to Trump rallies, and he very sort of, in a very open-ended way, he starts talking to Trump voters about what about this about Trump and what about that, and he tries to sort of argue in a very logical way with them. And he did one the other day where he was refuting every single thing that this woman was saying. And finally, after the last, what we would consider to be, the crowning rebuttal, she stood there on the video in like 4 or 5 seconds of silence. And then she just shrugged at him and said, "Well, I don't care." And that's, that's basically it. I don't care. Is that an organizing principle? All you can really do is try to outvote these people because there's no way to talk to them.
You're talking just a moment ago about wise men, but we're really talking about a class of politician who has been gone from the scene for a long time. We don't have any Everett Dirksons anymore. We don't have any George Mitchells or Frank Churches or folks who are kind of level-headed and really will negotiate, at the negotiating table. I don't really know. Just the other day, for example, the House has voted not to raise the debt ceiling. And when asked if he would intervene, Mitch McConnell said, "No, I'm not going to get involved. I have every faith in in the House," which he might be the only person in the United States who can say that. But we do not have that buffer layer anymore. That doesn't seem to be anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like we said, it takes a lot. I mean, this has been a long time coming. I mean, I think Newt Gingrich played a huge role about this in the early 90s and the coming of conservative talk radio, Rush Limbaugh, actually a few years before Newt Gingrich got power. And it's a complicated thing, but some of it you can almost trace back to sort of the culture war that broke out after the 1960s. I think the late 60s and sort of the era of so-called permissiveness and the Republican backlash to that with Reagan's election started, I think, to drive people into these two camps where they could not see the other side's point of view or values. And it took a while, I think, to sort of ripple through the electorate to the point where some of these senators, for example, that you just mentioned, John, the so-called moderates, Sam Nunn, conservative Democrat from Georgia, for example,
Sure.
they were gone. They were the ones who basically could forge deals when everybody else was grandstanding. And now they're not around anymore. So I think that's what's so scary about this, about refusing to raise the debt ceiling and maybe bringing America to the precipice of defaulting on its bills for programs they've already paid for. I mentioned before how Republicans voted 3 times to raise the debt ceiling during Trump's presidency. Well, what's interesting about that is it wasn't just the Republicans who voted 3 times to it. Democrats voted with them. Democrats voted along with Republicans 7 times during the George W. Bush era to raise the debt ceiling. And Democrats voted with Republicans, I have the stats here, 18 times during Ronald Reagan's two terms to raise it. And yet now, we got, so what worries me more than anything else is this whole notion perhaps that, if that crashing the economy, might just basically help them win the 2024 election. What about the full faith and credit of the U.S.? What about the ripple effects that could affect any of us, in terms of our investments? I hate to sound despairing about it, but I'd like to think there's going to be something pulled out of the rabbit out of the hat within the next 2 weeks, but I'll be pleasantly surprised.
If we're bringing it to a close here, and you brought us all to the edge of despondency, Dick.
I didn't mean to.
Is there any hope? Is there any ray of sunshine that you see? My first impression is if Congress continues business as normal, they're eventually going to come right down to the wire and up the debt ceiling rather, and go on from there. So do you see that being some sort of salvation?
All right. Well, the ray of hope that I have is that is that in the end, both sides will find a way to save face, because that's what's going to have to happen here, or as we sometimes call it now, they need an off ramp, and so. That Biden will come up with something that will make it sound like he's not totally giving in, and McCarthy and the Republicans will come up with something that Biden will sort of be able to sign off on, where the Republicans will at least be able to, argue that they're not giving in. I don't know what that is. Maybe it would just be basically, we'll raise the debt ceiling, but now we'll have these separate, really tough negotiations on the budget going forward, where Biden may have to agree to some cuts, but, he doesn't want to do it to the extent where he's undoing a lot of the achievements, frankly, of his first term. But that's my ray of hope, is that what my definition of sanity is, that they'll both find ways to save face, to their respective camps, to their respective bases.
Dick Polman, thanks for being here today and giving us those soothing words of wisdom after ruffling our feathers for most of the rest of the show.
Well, keep smiling and keep on keeping on, as the editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer used to say.
Thank you, Richard. Bye-bye.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Our lovely little podcast is available everywhere good podcasts are found. Listen on your favorite platform, and if you like what you hear, please give us a good rating.
And spread the word. Tell your friends about the Innertube and let them know they can subscribe to the podcast on our website, musicalinnertube.com.
There you can listen to all of our podcasts, see pictures and biographies of our guests, and contact us. You can even click on the microphone button in the lower right corner to leave us a voicemail.
And don't forget to leave your email address on our Talk to the Tube page so we can stay in touch.
And you can email us directly at musicalinnertube@gmail.com.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.